Hello and welcome back to episode 12 of the Eloquent in the Room podcast. I suppose you could call them the Dirty Dozen. If you were a prude. How do you like them apples? I'm Rose Cooper and I'm extremely pleased to present to you the second half of my conversation with Betty Martin, author of The Art of Receiving and Giving, The Wheel of Consent. As I mentioned last time, do yourself a favour and visit bettymartin.org to check out her fabulous free videos, each of which walk you step by gentle step through the Wheel of Consent model. Meanwhile, if you didn't listen to the first half of our chat, stop what you're doing right now and go back and do that, and then come back. We'll wait. Kidding. That joke never gets old. Or does it? Okay, here we are. Part 2 of Adulting Consent. The latest series. I'm literally picking up exactly where we left off, but I'm happy to say this conversation did absolutely neatly divide into 2 parts. The first half was us talking about how Betty got her groove on in the sacred sex therapy biz, which was a fascinating convo. In this half, we touch on the interesting, intriguing, powerful, beautiful, yet sometimes triggering and scary phenomena of how physical touch can access our emotions, as well as our state of arousal. I love being the proverbial guinea pig in these conversations. My own personal issues can be exposed at these times, and I'm more than happy to reflect on them. In fact, I was speaking to a friend last weekend and we were talking about that episode, and she mentioned that when I talked about people sucking energy out of the room, she was absolutely on board with what I was saying until Betty put her spin on it. And then, like me, she went, oh, yeah. Because Betty managed to turn that on its head in a way that was undeniably logical. You got to own your own feelings, folks. Finding Betty has helped to give me a clearer path to follow because my goal is to explore the topic of consent from many angles, in the least triggering and most life-affirming and empowering way possible. Obviously, women of mine and Betty's generation see things a little bit differently because we do have 20/20 hindsight and our minds and bodies have evolved through decades of experience, good and bad, between us. Well, not between us, but combined between, yeah, you know what I mean. And here we are feeling pretty much the same way about how beautiful sex can be when the focus is on it as a sensual act and the persons involved are fully respected and understood and they understand themselves more fully, and consent, therefore, is at maximum potential because everyone's turning up for the same or similar mindful, respectful, kind and loving experiences. And generous experiences and potentially explosive experiences. Take my word for it. This is not to say it fetishizes romantic love, but it does destigmatize sexual pleasure for its own sake without necessarily sexualizing and exploiting other people in the process. It's all about being self-aware and mindful. That kind of sex positivity, to me, involves consent with a capital C. You've got to know what you're doing. You've got to know what you're allowing. Don't walk in blindly. So, yeah. It's such a basic thing that we overlook so much. So, trust Betty to get us back on track. Because otherwise, sexual pleasure for its own sake can end up with some of us giving and receiving mindlessly, especially when young, inexperienced women are having sex because it's expected of them and they give no mind to their own pleasure at all. It's performative. That's not sex positivity. It's kind of sexual obliviousness. There's quite a few ways to go when discussing sex positivity. In fact, I'd like to appropriate a term more often used by the LGBTQIA plus community and call it the sex positivity umbrella.
The sex positivity umbrella.
Ella, Ella, Ella. Yes, I'm making light of it, but when you're talking about consent and sex, you're going to bump into people's triggers and prejudices and Achilles heels. I know my Achilles heels are stabbed every day when I look at how some other people view sex positivity on social media. However, if you go back and listen to my orgasm series, you'll notice that I took great delight in seeing the irony of being labelled a slut at 17. I think the most hilarious part of the slut moniker is it's most often used by people who want to fuck you or who have fucked you and have hard feelings for whatever reason. So it's really hard to take that seriously as an insult. And I knew this in 1978. I've always been what you would call sex positive, but that doesn't automatically mean my version of that is the same as most people's. I'm not a big fan of porn, for example, but that's a topic for another podcast. There are so many levels and nuances to everything, and it doesn't really take much sometimes to trigger yours truly. I'm not sure if I've mentioned it before, but I'll say it now. I'm a recovering victim of PTSD, and I do have generalised anxiety as a result. I'm so far ahead of where I was a few years ago, but the way forward for me when talking about these specific topics of consent and sex positivity has to be gentle and persuasive. And I can hear it playing going overhead, can you? This gentle chat between two women who love to see the funny side of things while both take it all quite seriously has been such a joy for me to broadcast. We're all so beautifully complex, and so are the topics of sex, love and mental health and the cognitive biases we all have about the whole darn shooting match. Bit by bit, I'm debriefing all of this with you, dear audience. I love that these interviews I've been doing, taking part as interviewer and interviewee, have allowed me to be quite forthcoming without feeling too self-conscious. And this part of the interview really highlights that. At one stage during the latter part of this interview, I was feeling quite vulnerable, and I'm happy to share that with you. Vulnerable. Vulnerable, yeah. Not vulnerable, vulnerable. Look, I may be an adorably queer old lady with a potty mouth and a love of bad puns and sloppy analogies, but in this particular episode, I really feel like I was giving voice to something that not many of us do, and that's to mention just how fragile we can all be at times, simply when we are being touched. So here we go. It's back to me and Betty. We haven't got enough time to talk about so many things that I want to talk to you about, Betty. I guess from a personal point of view, because I'm not a practitioner per se. I feel like I've been an unpaid practitioner a lot of the time. But what woman doesn't think that? Because, I'm like, when you have a picnic, you take all your rubbish away and everything. I like to leave people better off than they were when I met them, even if it's just having had a conversation online, someone trying to, this is talking about dating, I'm not dating at the moment, but, having that conversation, I would ask people why they were asking me questions. And after a while, I knew which conversations to shut down, but there was something in me that wanted to disabuse people of their approach, their condescension, or their preconceived ideas, because I want, if, you're not respecting me or you're not hearing me or seeing me right now, I would like to adjust that so the next time you talk to someone else, you might go into the conversation with that. I'm thinking of other people that they're going into contact totally with. Yeah, and same with having sex, I just lay out for them who I am, what I want. And when I say want, it's a really simple thing. It's connection. For me, the sex part is a no-brainer. So I just want that person to understand that I want permission, and I'm giving them permission to care about me during the exchange. And I mean, not just it's not a deep emotion, but it is. But it isn't. But it is. It's a connect. It's just connection. It's really hard to put into words. But what I find, and the thing holding me back from going into it as a practice, because I care about it so much, Betty, is the language around these things. I didn't grow up with religion, and I didn't grow up with formal education, or like tertiary education or whatever. I was just very, very simple young girl with very modest aspirations that, I developed more interested things as I became a woman. But what I'm noticing, particularly in social media and in therapeutic practices and conversation and language around sexuality, obviously we talk about sex positivity, which is, I guess, as opposed to Puritanism. We want to reduce people's moral shame around sex. And we're saying, let's just take religion out of it. But we're also having words like sacred and ritual and goddess energy and all of these sort of interesting phrases, which I like. I really like them. But at the same time, I feel like at the end of the day, it's a word to give you permission to like your body, to give you permission to like pleasure. So it's still and to give you permission to connect with someone else. And calling it sacred, I love it. And I think, and worship. You just said that you listened to the conversation that I had with Jessie, and they used the phrase, I want to be in full worship of that person. And that's how I feel about the experience, or the experience I would like to have with someone I do care about is that feeling of worship. So did you have a religious upbringing? Have you ever analysed within yourself this urge that we have to fill this hole within ourselves, either with religion or with relationship energy that feels worshipful? It's still, to me, it's almost two sides of the same coin. It's embodied by music artists like Madonna, who brought Catholicism and worship and sexuality together, and Florence Welch does the same thing. She a lot of her imagery is ceremonial and stuff. And I feel weird in churches, but I also feel weirdly aroused in churches. So how much have you ever thought about how much of what you do and how much of what it is being human is the church of humanity, or just put your phone down, turn the television off, let's go out into the forest, let's just be human beings together, and how much of that is our sophistication as human beings, or how much of it is our naivety? I'm like, am I really going right off the rails?
No, that's a great question. I totally agree with you that calling something sacred is a way to give ourselves permission to pay attention to it. And for some years, when in my early exploring days, we would talk about sacred sexuality, and it was kind of a thing. And then I realized, largely through getting to know prostitutes who were not doing so-called sacred work, but were just doing sex work, that, you know what? It's either it's all sacred or nothing is sacred. Like this kind of sex is sacred and this kind of sex is not. Like, what's that about? That just continues the same split that we already have. This is sacred and it's good, and this is profane and it's bad. Fuck that.
Good girl, bad girl.
Fuck that.
This is where I think society is coming to the thin edge of the wedge now.
Yeah.
Because a lot of everything's becoming conflated, and people's individual, I use the word a lot, authenticity, but I suppose it's a hackneyed term sometimes. But what is right for you and what feels right for you could be something that you have adapted from a previous thing that wasn't right for you. It was kind of wrong for you. That's where I'm at. I was under the thumb before, but it gave me orgasmic potential, and now I use it for good instead of being under the thumb. Like, it's sort of like, I feel empowered.
Of course we adapt what we've been given. I mean, that's what we do as human beings. I was raised Methodist, which means that you're supposed to be good. By all means, just be good. Like, that's what I could sum up. My whole religious upbringing was be good, be nice. But we adapt things that have been hard for us. There's a book called The Erotic Mind by, I forgot his name. He'll come in a minute. But he talks about,
I'll look it up and I'll drop it into the show notes so that people have access to it.
He talks about how we take things that have been problematic or distressful and we eroticize them as a way to heal them and put ourselves back together. And so we can do this with playing with power, for example. Power's just, it seems to me, inherently erotic. And, you can play with power exchanges in all kinds of interesting ways, both physical and mental and just all kinds of ways. I think our eroticism is largely cultural, I think. I mean, we have, we're monkeys, so we have the urge to fuck. But everything else that erotic is a much bigger idea, and it comes a lot from our ideas about who we are and what turns us on and who this other person is. And, it's just a much bigger, richer thing than the urge to fuck. And I think it's largely cultural, more than we probably want to admit to ourselves.
Yeah. Sometimes I just came into my head, but I particularly with women and their impression, I suppose you can't have one without the other, really. It's not exclusive to women, but their impression of themselves once they become cognizant of who they are, what they look like, and the effect that has on other people and all that sort of stuff. And you get to a point where you do become a bit more, for want of a better word, enlightened about these things. And you kind of erase previous ideas about what you thought, and you go into it with a whole new understanding of things. And sometimes you think it'd be good if we could put that in a pill or a drink or some sort of erasure. Like, can we all just find a level playing field somehow and erase the layers of perception and ego and conditioning and religion and culture and all that sort of stuff to save us this agonizing journey in our lives? Because
there are some shortcuts.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I hate, like, you see what people go through. Like, you want to plant, certain seeds of understanding, but it seems like overcoming conditioning might be age specific sometimes, whether it's a brain development thing. Or...
I'm not sure. I think, I know people who are having aha moments in their teens that I didn't have until I was in my 40s. and vice versa. And so, my guess is that it's a really complex mix of your own inherent temperament, your upbringing, your culture, your religion, your family, things you're exposed to as over the course of your life. I feel very lucky that I grew up in the hippie years, because I feel like that gave me a foundational understanding of the fact that things are not as they appear, and what Mom and Dad told us are not true. And I'm very thankful for that. And
the foundation of hippie is love. The foundation of hippie is love. That's the thing. Yeah. People think of free love, but the word love is not irrelevant to the hippie. It's a universal love. Yeah.
And we were as fucked up and hateful as anybody else. But and we were sexist and racist as anybody else. We thought we were making huge advances, and I think we did make some advances. And obviously, there's more to do. So anyway,
absolutely.
So I think we're very complex mixes of all those things, and we have a lot of our aha moments depend on having experiences, and of what we're. And having experiences depends on what we're exposed to, what we have an opportunity for.
Do you find that, because I'm of the school of thought that a lot of our barriers towards not just pleasure but orgasm for women is not necessarily knowing which parts of their body work, but having the attitude towards allowing pleasure and being present and all that sort of stuff.
I think that is more of a factor than knowing your body parts.
Well, that's where we 100% agree. How do you feel about the pervading press being about body parts, like to the exclusion of, like, it feels like every other day, maybe it's indicative of the accounts I follow or whatever, but every other day it's this is your clitoris, or jokes about men not knowing what it is, or, if you meet someone, you need to tell them that you have a clitoris, and clitoris, and
great.
And I think, that's something we should know, and it's part of sex education for me. But orgasm is the sum of so many other parts. How have you evolved, if I may ask the personal question, orgasmically, as a result of all the teachings and learnings and stuff that you've experienced? Like, did you go from feeling one way, genitally focused, and then discover a whole world, or was there always part of you that was always engaged with your entire physical being?
I was very full body focused. I wasn't particularly genitally focused. It was, I grew up in the era when nice girls didn't fuck, but boy, we had some great petting. I'm telling you, we had some great petting, and I love that. I learned to love just fondling and smooching.
I think having that that hesitation around intercourse did some of us favors, definitely, because the anticipation was there, and the seed that you're that there is real, genuine, ecstatic pleasure to be had in every part of the journey before, like foreplay, petting, whatever we want to call it. And because you weren't spending all night having intercourse,
that's right.
You're spending all night doing that, and you think, wow. I just, yeah.
In playing the 3-minute game, it can be anybody, but it's best to learn it without genitals.
Yeah.
Because once you're on genitals, it's very hard to learn something new. You go right back to your impulse to get the job done.
Yeah.
So in playing with the wheel of consent in the 3-minute game, I encourage people to start without any genitals on the menu.
Have there been particular workshops or treatments or whatever that have resulted in arousal, pleasure being received in highly unusual ways that even surprised you?
Oh, hell yes.
Well, I thought. Well, now that we've talked about clitoris for a while, I thought let's just also plant the seed of fingertips. How cool are they? Or earlobes, or whatever else it may be. So anything, whether it's something personal or something that someone has experienced.
Any body part can be incredibly pleasurable. Any body part can turn you on, depends on who's touching it, how, why, and what you're thinking. Like this idea of erogenous zones just makes you want to gag, because anything is erotic, it is erogenous, if that's where your attention is.
Yeah.
And your genitals, I mean, they have lots of more nerve endings, so they're very sensitive, but they're not inherently erotic. I mean, you go to your gynecologist. Is that erotic? No, probably not.
Yeah.
But it's those genitals, it's your body part. So, what's erotic doesn't have to do with what body part it is. It has to do with your intention and your attention and who it is and what agreement you've made and, lots of stuff.
And one thing I wanted to bring up with you too, in regards to an experience I had, and you might be able to characterize it as something that you've experienced in your workshops and stuff. But again, to the Tantra workshop night that I have experienced a few times, one particular time it was about consent specifically. The men were in one, had a talk given to them in a different room, women in another room. Then when we were to come together, women were to stand socially distanced apart with their eyes closed, and this is nothing to do with COVID, but everything to do with the distance apart, with their eyes closed, and men were then to mill around and take the opportunity to approach with touch and note body language or attention or intention or something shift within the female as to whether or not
they start out with touching.
Yeah, so the idea is they might preferably place a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder. And it was like a 30-second sort of thing. And see what happens. And so from the point of view of being a recipient to that, it blew my mind how much, and it's kind of that energetic thing I was referring to earlier. You'd feel someone place their hand on your shoulder. They'd either be a person who is naturally adept at giving comfort, and you knew that from the moment their hand, you felt the energy of their hand relax you. And at that particular time in my life where I was feeling a lot of emotional turmoil after a relationship breakup and stuff, I found the comforting hand released an emotion, like a very strong emotion that I never really imagined. At other times, someone would place a hand and you'd feel them sort of like tapping very, very tentatively, and you find yourself reaching for that person's hand to give them permission to touch you. And so it was a really nice headspace to be in, from the point of not only giving consent, but enabling someone else to have permission to try and be tactile or whatever it is in that moment. But within that exercise, I think I was tapped or touched on the shoulder by, half a dozen different men.
Not all at once.
And we were told to, or men were told to respond to what they sensed. So in the case of the person who put their hand on my shoulder and I had an emotional reaction, tears started streaming down my face, and his instinct was to put his arms around me. And at that moment, they changed the exercise to incorporate music, and music came up. So we started to dance, and our hands touched. He put his arm around my waist, and we started touching fingers in a tactile way. And within a split second, my tears were extreme arousal, like I was feeling really turned on by being there. And it was an immediate thing. Now, this is what really, really planted the seed in me of how much of our intention can be misread, misinterpreted, or felt in a different way. And and understanding what consent is within the realm of what I'm consenting to, and vulnerability and all of this really, really cool stuff that human beings don't really take into account when they're talking about intimacy or interaction or sexual interaction or whatever. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how much of that are you able to explain in regards to when you're giving workshops or talking about consent or whatever, to explain or to help people rationalize just how tactile they are and just how much emotion as well as erotic and arousal of feeling can be triggered, and how to be gentle with themselves in those moments.
Well, we don't talk about it, we do it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So when you're in this experience and you found that you were suddenly aroused and you were dancing, what are you saying that had to do with consent? Are you saying that you weren't expecting it, you didn't feel good about it, or you thought he misinterpreted it, or what is it you're saying there?
I feel that, personally speaking, at that moment, this person, and I had my eyes closed, another person took over the hug at some stage, and I don't even know who that person was because I have my eyes closed, which is a cool thing. I think it's quite an interesting thing, is that both emotion and arousal were hunger in me that were triggered by physical touch. And hey?
Of course.
Yeah, so that sort of made me realize, okay, me as a person and sex, our relationship is I think forever changed because of my life experiences, my emotional condition, my anxiety, all that sort of stuff. So I know how to, because of that experience, I know how to allow for feelings to surface or create boundaries or whatever. For me personally, I kind of have to avoid physical touch because I'm a lightweight emotionally and arousal. So how do you, when I say this to you, what's the conversation you would have with someone around that?
Of course.
I love that. I love that.
When we are touched, we feel things. Of course we do.
Yeah.
That's what touch is about. And sometimes with some touch we feel comfort. Sometimes it changes, and it can change in a moment. And this is the nature of human beings with nervous systems and emotional systems. And this is part of the reason that we touch, so that we feel things.
Yeah.
And it can totally surprise us. And it can be very deep. The feelings can be amazingly deep. And we may have no idea what they're about. And that is fine. Because that's our nervous system and our brains doing their job.
Yeah.
And so I think we, as much as we can, we want to be have compassion for ourselves, for our feelings, because feelings are just feelings. And a lot of us avoid them because, God, we don't know, we've never been taught what to do with them. The problem is not having feelings. The problem is not knowing what to do with them. And so we avoid all of them. And so then you get this hand on your shoulder and all the tears come, and then we think, oh, shit, now I've got feelings. Now what do I do?
Yeah.
But you just let yourself cry for a minute, and then they'll be gone.
And why do you think we as a society seek to suppress emotions from the moment children start crying? If they fall over, we go, there, stop crying. That's the first thing we say to kids. So it's all about misbehaving emotionally?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Also, I think, none of us were really supported and taught much about our feelings. And so when our children have feelings, we sure as hell don't want to see that, because then it just brings it all up in us, and we ain't going there. We don't, so got to shut up.
Or see it as weakness.
And it just gets carried along.
Yeah.
And different cultures, some cultures are more comfortable with feelings than others, of course. Ours is just about the worst. Well, I'm not sure that's true. I think there's some worse than ours, but there's definitely some better than ours.
Yeah, there's probably so many things that we don't know about cultures that, we're just and it depends on your gender too. Little boys are taught it's okay to be mad but not to be sad, and little girls are taught it's okay to be sad but not to be mad. And do you see a day where we might possibly touch on some of these subjects with kids from a young age, just to help them regulate
I think
their own emotions?
People are doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, is it enough? No, but it's, there are people who are teaching parents. There are, some schools and, children's care things that have a kind of an emotional curriculum. And so it's happening. It'd be great if it happened more.
So do you feel that, obviously there's out there in the world, people are sometimes stuck with the notion of casual sex and relationship being the two opposite sides of the same coin. And
there are people stuck everywhere. So yeah,
exactly. But I think young people are having trouble with relationships, particularly in we forget that we're human beings at the end of the day, whether it's relationships or whether it's casual sex. We forget that the simple act of touching or embracing or having sex, having an orgasm, all of these things access emotions that we sometimes don't understand. Do you feel there's...
It'd be hard.
Is there a way... I feel like I'm like, what can we do? What can we do, Betty? How can we sort of create a brand around feelings being the thing that, people are, regardless of whether it's casual sex or not, feelings will be present, whatever feelings there are, because we're giving a simplistic idea to people around casual sex being meaningless.
Oh, yeah, right.
And people catching feelings
Right, God forbid.
And it's giving, unfortunately, it's giving men a license to use the phrase, this is just casual, thinking that just saying the words negates any energy they give out or any action they put out. And women are feeling victimized and, in a way, heart raped by people being close, being intimate, but still not acknowledging that person's presence or importance in the other person's life. So it's probably a deep psychological thing to jump into at the end of our time, but...
Well, it's unfortunate, and I suspect that a certain amount of it is gender programming.
Yeah.
And some of it may be biological brain function. I don't know, but yeah, of course you're going to have feelings. That's what sex is for. Like, if it was just procreation, it would be over in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Just like, I don't know, some other animal. But we have prolonged experiences of pleasure that are possible. And pleasure inherently bonds you to the people that you have it with.
Yeah.
That's how our hormonal systems work.
That's the key.
So, of course we have feelings about the people.
Yeah.
And add to that, hopefully they're warm, pleasant feeling. Add to that we have a fetish about romantic feelings. Or I have had it. As a young person, my fetish was romance. It took me, many years to figure that out. But I think as a culture, too, we have this idea that a relationship with a capital R is about sex and romance, and you're exclusive, and you're focused on each other. And other kinds of relationships, friendships, for example, don't get quite the same respect. And we are always aiming for that one and only romantic connection that's going to save us from all of our distress.
Yeah. We place it at the top of the hierarchy of relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. And so as soon as we feel warm feelings for someone, we think, oh, I'm in love with them. And you may be, you may not be, or they may just, we're mysterious creatures ruled by our brain chemistry.
I feel like you've really, really encapsulated for me anyway the fact that pleasure is a bonding thing, just as laughter is a bonding thing, or just any mutually enjoyed experience is a bonding thing. But we look at pleasure, the word pleasure, or we market it when we talk about pleasure-based sex. I think people mistakenly think of it as gratuitous pleasure, something I am taking from or giving to. But these two things, we ignore the possible or probable bond of that thing, and we become totally confused, therefore, when it happens naturally.
Sure.
Yeah, it's like a dichotomy, something to overcome. It's like, well, yes, I can have casual lovers. Yes, I can think of sex in a category of a pleasure thing, but it's also good to acknowledge that I have some kind of, at some level, a connection and a bond with the person I'm having this pleasurable experience with. And I think people will give themselves the gift of the acknowledgement of that if they can do it without feeling that it obligates that person to graduate to being in a relationship.
Yeah. And
Does that make sense?
I think too that we want more. We want, this person, we had a great sexual encounter and it was really fabulous, and I want it again. Well, of course. we want that person's attention on us.
Yeah.
And if they don't give us their attention, then that hurts.
Yeah.
Because, of course, we want someone's attention that we like. Of course we do. I mean, that's how we are.
And it's human nature to read the lack of attention as rejection.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I
do not envy young people who are having hookup sex.
Hey?
I mean, I do not envy young people who that have a cultural thing now about hookup sex that wasn't the case when I was around. But I imagine that it's challenging.
The best analogy I can think of on the spot is that they're going shopping, and someone who is more cognizant of the potential of those experiences just comes home with a bigger bag full of more things, and the person who goes into this hookup culture not having and when I say expectations, just an understanding of the potential of that experience, is going to come home with a very light bag that might only have a couple of things in it, if anything, and they're thinking, well, that wasn't worth the trouble, or they don't take it on board as a learning experience. They just keep repeating the same experience, expecting a different result, because they don't recognise the pleasure in a way that is a nourishing, like a self-nourishing thing, not just a transaction of ego or am I sexy enough to look at. That's, I think, young people these days especially are going into, like, if I look sexy enough, if I wear the right clothes and act the right way, then I'll
get attention.
And the sexual experience is going to be pleasurable, because this is, they have no point of reference outside pornography or what they've been told by people, or expectations from particular people. So that's where
Is it any worse than being raised with this, restrictive, nice girls don't do it until they're married, and if you do, you're a terrible slut, and like, I'm not sure it's any worse. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I have
no idea.
It's kind of the same. I was only thinking about that recently, because, like, when I asked my mum if I could go on the pill when I was 16, all she said was, oh, if you have to, but that doesn't mean you can just go and open your legs for anybody. That was just, and drumming into people, have respect, but we weren't really understanding what respect looked like, or what it meant.
Do we even now? I'm not sure we do now. Respect means so many different things.
For my mother's generation, or the Beyonce put a ring on it. It's like respect equals love, or if you have sex with me, you can't then come away from the experience thinking less of me. You have to think more of me, or some kind of equation that goes into respect. But now in my life, I think I definitely have too much respect for myself to go and hook up with someone without coming away with my full bag of goodies, Everyone's goodies are different, but I think humanity has baseline goodies that we all need to sort of be, making sure we've got. If you have other things, fine, but I think that basic human needs, pleasure, bonding, these are our primal instincts, and we search for them as family members, we search for them as parents, we search for them as children. We always just want that comfort and belonging and all that sort of stuff that goes along with being physically engaged, holding hands, all of that sort of stuff.
I think that's true. We have a basic human need for connection, affection, play, pleasure, touch.
Compassion. All of the stuff, all of the good stuff. Thank you so much. I can't begin to thank you enough. I just feel my heart is exploding. I'm so grateful for having a conversation with someone that I feel gets it to the extent that I don't even get it, but only because I can't intellectualize it. I can't put it into words. I just feel like some things you can't put into words. I know I understand things, and I know you understand things, and I'm just glad that you felt...
Which makes having a podcast kind of hard to get things into words.
It does. That's where the journalistic background helps.
Yeah.
And the early series that I did, I took a lot of trouble to write it to make it listenable as great. Well as informative. But at the end of the day, having a conversation, you know that people will pick out of the conversation what they will, depending on what their attention span is like. Yeah. But I just hope that, or I feel that the more people of our generation that are just so chill, so relaxed, so morally fine, because people will never see it coming. For starters, when you do engage with people and say, oh, by the way, I'm really interested in sex, and people think, oh, hasn't it got cobwebs by now? Like what? I got really you. So I'm trying to change everyone's mind or disrupt the conversation around so many different things. And I know I find it hard to temper my enthusiasm around it. You seem so relaxed.
Well, you're doing a great job of talking about it. It's really fun.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate you saying that. In the future, I love the look of your workshops and all that sort of stuff. So I can see myself, trying to find time to engage in that. Because I don't want this to be the last I see you.
No,
I think you're wonderful. But yeah, obviously I will include all of the information that people need to get in touch with you and to find your book and your website and all that sort of stuff. And on behalf of everyone in the world, thank you for what you do.
Oh, you are welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Yeah, thank you so much. I won't keep you. I know you have to go.
It's fun to meet you.
It was fun to meet you too. Thank you so much, Betty.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, that's how that went. It was warm and fuzzy, wasn't it? See what I mean by vulnerability? With the pop culture and social media version of sex positivity bombarding young people with fashion, cosmetics, surgery, music clips, everything that reflects the ubiquity of porn culture mostly is what I find problematic, because we're kind of forgetting the multitude of different facets behind the simple act of being tactile with each other, which is what sex is, and how sometimes those facets can zero in on all sorts of emotions, positive, negative, confusing, compelling, repelling. They can be deep. There's consequences to what we do, and I just want us to put a little bit more thought into absolutely every part of it. There's a lot of stuff to unpack. I'm going to tackle this consent conversation in all sorts of different ways over the next week or so. I'm not really sure how it's going to end, but I do know the direction it's going in thanks to Betty. It seems she came into my life at the right time. I'd love your feedback. I do receive feedback, but lately you've been busy. You've been preoccupied out there, because I'm not getting as much feedback lately. So, yeah, drop me an email at theeloquentintheroom@gmail.com or pop a DM at me at social media at The Eloquent in the Room on Instagram and Facebook. My blog is due for an update soon. That's theeloquentintheroom.com. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, rate and share the podcast with all and sundry. And you know what? Do follow me on Instagram, because that's where I do most of my posts regularly, like with monotonous regularity. It's about the podcast updates and stuff, but also other stuff. Like last week I turned 59.
So I decided I'm going to pay a year-long tribute to Kate Bush with, I'm going to post a Reels video every week for the next 52 weeks. Well, actually, it's the next 51 weeks because I started last week. And right up until I turn 60 this time next year. Because why not? It's time to celebrate my life. So that's how I'm going about it. And of all the artists that have impacted me, I'd have to say Kate has led the way. Just in front of Bowie and the Beatles and a few others. I could be here all day naming them. But I can honestly say, when I thought of the idea of featuring 52 different songs, it made it a no-brainer for me to pick her because of the degree to which I immersed in all her CDs. CDs? Don't you mean records, you old bag? Since she came into my life when I was 16. So I'm going to enjoy paying tribute to her and having conversations around those tunes for the next year. Who says I can't commit? To 16-year-long relationships, I can definitely fucking commit. Speaking of music, with this interview being mainly about skin contact, ultimately, kind of was, I decided to contact a gifted artist friend of mine who goes by the name of Wandering Minstrel, who, in collaboration with a very cool band called Deep Sea Lights, created this wonderful music you're about to hear. Wandering Minstrel recorded this to enhance their spoken word poem, Your Skin Breathes Too. So it seemed the perfect way to float our way out of this lovely chat I had with the beautiful Betty. Don't forget to check my show notes for the links to this track, these artists, and how to follow them on social media and Spotify and iTunes and all that sort of jazz. Make sure you check out the clip that accompanies this track on YouTube. It is so trippy and dreamy and beautiful. Look, you can thank me later. Enjoy it, and I'll talk to you soon.
You were here before pieces of pressed paper and memories told you how much you were worth. Before you were taught your time was the only thing you could trade, besides your body, besides your voice, besides your breath. You stand as it all swells around you. You forget that your skin also is alive, and it takes on thousands of years of decisions and trapped code running around your blood, looking for a way out. So sometimes you scream, sometimes you cry, sometimes you sleep to both forget and remember. Your skin breathes too in its own time. Everything flows in and out. You forget there is a kind of fire in your eyes, a kind that never goes out. It is refueled by those that you love. It is lit by the trees you walk beside, the ground that stretches out in front of you. I was told the truth of who I was the other day by another that saw that I had forgotten. Sometimes I remember at the very core there is a tiger there, an owl that sits on my shoulders, the warrior that moves in silence, trusting. You were here before pieces of pressed paper and memories told you how much you were worth. And I see hope in your eyes, and I feel the warmth of your embrace, and I remember. I remember.